was waiting for the finger to drop. I didn't. He told me the cue.
Say it again.
Good morning. Good morning. So, as a lesson in careful what you ask for, how many of those have you had? It's been 2 years at least that Tommy and I have been on Robert, you gotta take a vacation. You gotta take some time off. Oh, well, we're going somewhere on Tuesday, and we'll be back on Wednesday, or we're going on Friday, we'll be back Saturday. Robert, you need some time off, away. You and Natalie both. And I had the cockamamie idea once of saying, well, Robert, you need to take some time off. And I mean a Sunday or 2 or 3, and I could be one of the ones that filled in for you. Well, and I guess he took it to heart, but boy, did he have to do it like this. So, and I think Robert is showing us a lesson in surrender, that he has just turned over his entire trust in those doctors and the hospital and the caregivers there, and he's responding to it. His body is, and he's turned over. It's like, all right, open me up, and it's amazing. And it sneaks up on us. These opportunities. Maybe we're not ready every time. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart. You will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This was Jesus' invitation to us to surrender, to give up our need to control every little thing. Now, this is, 2,000 and some odd years ago, and the world was really a different place back then. The culture was different. Jesus called it the world. Our modern term is the culture. And was it really all that different? People, they're worried about how they're going to feed their family. His setting, his physical setting, they were occupied by a foreign power. That's pretty burdensome. They had sort of a not official caste system like India, but there was definitely classes, and there wasn't a lot of movement between the classes. And the religious elites held themselves above people and pretty much made you feel like you didn't measure up, because nobody does. And that is a burden because they are the gatekeepers of the temple, and therefore to the infinite and the holy, and so it feels burdensome. And that's not very different than today, is it? And this culture, in our culture today, I'll just shift to today because I live it today. It doesn't support something like powerlessness or surrender. The culture honors winning in competition. when there's competition and winning, that also means somebody loses. And anything that looks like powerlessness or smacks of weakness, it's just disdained and rolled over. We make fun of it. And this happens from a really early age. I mean, think back when you were in school. And our role models, were our parents and our teachers, and even the structure of schools themselves. We have a grading system, and we rank how well you're doing. I can remember I think it was third grade, I was really good at arithmetic and dividing, multiplying, and the faster you could do it, and the more you got right, you get your name on the board in this honor list. And there would be like a compute-off. And the winner got to wear a crown for the week. Oh, I wanted that crown. I wanted it at least once. And, it spreads much farther, and sports is all about competition, and sports is like worship in our culture. It's put on a big altar and given our most visible and highest places. But even, in the workplace, you want to get ahead, It's just constant. Okay, true confession here. I know nobody else does this, but driving, he just passed me, and I was trying to get around, and, wait a minute, is this really a competition? Well, it kind of is for me sometimes. It's crazy. And it's amazing that she's lived with me and trusts me to drive for 40 years. We're actually over 40 years into it. It's amazing. But it's all pervasive. Like even something as generous as gift giving. So-and-so gave us a gift. We've got to get something for them. Or we have to take something to this event at their house because everybody's going to take it. Or it's expected. Or last year, she gave us something, so we've got, and it's just seldom are we modeled and encouraged to live freely. I mean, this transactional basis of tit for tat, and you give something because you get something in return, or somebody gives you something. You can't just receive. You've got to equal it out. Everything has to be fair. And it's the way it is. It's the way the world works, and it kind of works, but it only works on a superficial level. I mean, I say superficial. I mean, it has giant institutions that support it, and you need this education and this worldly training to get by in the world. But it's what somewhere she could probably remember. It's called the first education, or some people call it the first half of life. And at some point, we need to move beyond that and live a little more freely, so that we're not bound by an obligation every time somebody gives us something. I mean, I was telling Ginger recently, this guy approached me in the parking lot of Home Depot, and I've got a cart, lumber on it, and he wants some money so that he can go spend it on whatever. He said a breakfast taco. But, I felt this like, I can load this lumber myself. I don't need you to help me. And, that's a pride thing. And the pride is kind of like my own reward for doing things and earning things. And it's like a medal I can pin on my shirt. And fortunately, I've had a few shocks in life and know that I can receive, and I let the guy help me load the lumber, but it took me, I had to go through a little process to get there. I mean, it's not that I'm just, and he wasn't judgmental of me that I could tell, so that was great. And this system that it comes from the earliest age, when, when a baby does something, we smile at it, we laugh. And I don't know if you ever noticed, but a newborn baby, you smile at it and it smiles back. I'm talking like first day. And one of my granddaughters was, she 1 day old? I don't know. We were there at her house, and she's lying on the bed, and her head flopped over this way. I happened to be looking that way, so I was kneeling down, and her eyes just locked on me. And I couldn't help it. I just beamed, and she beamed back. So there's and it's wonderful. But at some point, they learn, if I do something, I'm going to get that smile. And that smile's like approval. If I do something funny or good, or I put on a dance, or play the piano, I get this approval. And inside our minds, this false self, as it's called, it's just built up layer after layer after layer, and this true being that just gives and receives, mainly receives. A newborn baby, we feel like they're giving us something, but they're not overtly giving anything. But boy, we sure love to be around them. And they are receiving. They're receiving our love, our smiles, our joy, and that ability to receive is filtered through all this stuff that we put on. And it helps us get through the world. To be truly, totally vulnerable in everyday situations. It's tough. It may not work. I don't know. But there is more. And, we know it. And it's kind of funny. I've got these notes, and I went over it, and I changed stuff order, and then before the service started, I made this prayer that I've heard, that I said, God, give me, I'm personalizing it, give me the grace, and speak through my lips, hear through my ears, open my heart, and so that's what's happening. It's not in any order. But this, yes, exactly. This, it's how we get by in the world. And like the Pharisees were, we see them as kind of the bad guy in a lot of Jesus' rants. The Pharisees were the holier than thou. They were the religious authorities that put themselves above other people, and that's actually what, why we're taught that they caught Jesus' ire more than anybody else. He never ranted and raved against the Roman soldiers or the tax collectors and the thieves and prostitutes. He didn't rant and rave and have moral arguments against that. But when you make yourself a gatekeeper on somebody's spiritual advancement, their journey, and then you close the door on them and act like a hypocrite, then you caught Jesus' eye. And so, we think of them as kind of the bad guys, but the author of this book about the Beatitudes sounding in Christian tradition said, it's all too easy for us to treat the Pharisees as embodying that is worst in humankind. But in fact, they were probably the best men of their time, the most religious, the most devoted to the will of God, the most eager to express their loyalty to Him in obedience to His every word, the most determined never to compromise with the world around them. But as St. Paul came to see it in retrospect, they were exposed to a fatal flaw. The trouble with their outstanding righteousness was that, all too easily, it could be viewed precisely as their righteousness. It was a righteousness that could be measured, so that at a certain point, you could say that you had now achieved it. This meant it was all too easily to come adrift from its original inspiration and devotion to God and become self-sufficient, an end in itself. And one of my notes here is that the false self, and I don't know that I really need to define it, but I kind of have already this persona that builds up in us, and it's our view of the world and how we get by, and that's called our false self by certain teachers. And one of my teachers is Father Thomas Keating, and he used to say that the false self doesn't give up easily. It goes out kicking and screaming. That it's sneaky. He also tells us that it'll co-opt anything. Well, here the Pharisees had this original intention to be devoted to God. And the false self said, I can be devoted to God better than anybody. I can be the best prayer. I can give money to the temple better than anybody. There's another one of Jesus' stories where the guy says, thank God I'm not like that lowly woman. You love me and I give good, and so I get good back. That's the false self that's taken something that's pure and co-opted it for the ego's. Because it's a transaction then, and it makes sense. God's world doesn't make sense. There isn't any fairness. What are these things here? This is a book called Breathing Underwater by Richard Rohr. And the title comes from a poem about letting go, surrender. And the opening paragraph of his book says, I must be upfront with you. I do not really understand why God created the world this way. I do not know why power is at its best in weakness, and that's in quotes, as St. Paul says, or it is when I am weak that I am strong. That's a quote from 2 Corinthians. It sure seems like God is some kind of trickster. Perhaps the divine is playing games with us. God seems to have hidden holiness and wholeness in a secret place where only the humble will find it. Some topsy-turvy God has decided that those on the bottom will be revealed as the true top, and those who try for the top, as the world defines it, will find nothing of substance there. Why such a disguise? Why such a game of hide and seek? And that we'll find nothing of substance there. That's pretty telling, isn't it? That I can be the, I was going to say like valedictorian of my class. I was far from that. Let me I can go to college and, of course I won't go. What actually happens though is that in life, these shocks, flunking out of college, having words that you've said that were so clever and witty thrown back at you as inappropriate and ill-timed, they like hit those layers and shatter and expose us so that we can receive. I mean, even when we overtly try to block God's grace, it finds a way in. It comes in through the cracks. So, somewhere in here, Father Richard says that in AA meetings, they're one of the best places. And it seems like these churches where upstairs, where the Mass is on Sunday, everything is orthodox, orderly, and run by this false self system. And down in the basement where the AA meeting is, somehow through the ductwork and in the cracks of the doors, grace finds its way in. So, God is some kind of trickster. Or it seems like it to our false self system. But this is not what Jesus taught. He taught that the sun rises on the bad and the good. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. He taught the parable of the prodigal son. He had a whole bunch of them, the kingdom of God is like. And my favorite is the prodigal son. And, everybody knows the story. The younger son goes to his dad and says, "Give me my inheritance," which is kind of an insult and a slap in the face when the guy's still alive. And what does he do? He gives it to him. And he takes it away, the younger son, and squanders it all, and prostitutes and living, and he's starving because there's a famine where he is. And he says, "I'm going to crawl back home and apologize." And he rehearses this speech. And he says, "When I get there, I'm going to say, 'Forgive me for this, I've insulted you,' and this, that, and the other, and blah, 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 blah." And he starts heading home, and when he was still a long way off, the father sees him and runs to meet him and embraces him, and he starts doing his apology, and the guy cuts him off. "Get a ring for his finger and a robe to put around him, and kill the fatted calf." And this is the father. And then the older brother is petulant and pissed off because he's been good. And guess what? The one who's been bad's getting a party and the fatted calf. And he says, "Well, you never did this for me." And what does the father say? "My son, everything I have is yours." This is the God that Jesus taught us, the kind of relationship that we can have. And that was 2,000 years ago. The false self doesn't die easily. We had other teachers, even before Jesus, the author of the book of Job or Ecclesiastes. Those are things aren't fair there. And then, there were later, I don't know, of course I don't know law, but I thought of like St. Francis. He didn't hold a grudge. He didn't hold on to anything except the fire in his heart to follow the love of God and to spread the love of God, to be Christ in the world. And yet the culture persists because the false self doesn't die easily. And Jesus himself gave us some examples of surrender. One of them I thought of, I looked it up in John chapter 8, of the adulterous woman. And it's a trap they laid for him. He walks up, and they were ready, they knew he was coming somehow. And these right-thinking, right-acting, law-abiding religious types were there, and they had a woman they had caught in adultery. And their law says a woman caught in adultery gets stoned. And Jesus has been teaching forgiveness, 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 and acceptance. And they said, Jesus, this woman was caught in adultery. What does the law say to do? And they had him. They had him. And so what did he do? He didn't fight. He didn't resist. He knelt down and he started doodling in the dirt. And the way I'm reading it, he didn't even look up. At some point, and what's the doodling? Maybe it's to just create a little opening for the divine to guide him, to hear his inner guide. I don't know. You know, to not be reactive, you know, count to 10 before you talk back or something. And he didn't even look up. And he says, you know, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And that's it. And right away the elders were like, well, he's got me there. And they turned around and walked off. And eventually even the young bucks who, you know, well, surely I can, if I search my mind and deep enough, I can know that I'm without sin, that was justified. And eventually, even the young ones, they drift away. And so finally he looks up, and she's all by herself. So that's a surrender, right? He didn't say, I can figure this out, or I can straighten you guys out. He didn't argue. He allowed. He opened himself to receive by withdrawing from that confrontation. He also said explicitly, and I couldn't find the reference to it, but I know it said that I myself, I can do nothing. It's the Father within that does the work. And yet, many of the people then, and even more now, worship the man Jesus. And he told us that it's the Father within that does the work. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, you know, his big surrender there is, you know, I'm perfectly happy to not go along with this if you're willing, but if this is your will that I go through this, then I accept it. You know, there's some pretty big surrender. And one thing I wanted to bring in, it's not flowing smoothly here, but I'm going to switch gears to 12-step groups. That I was active in a 12-step group in a prison. And when I first went to the prison, the group was really pretty stable. It had a bunch of women. There was one in particular who had been in the group for more than 10 years. She'd been in prison for 20 or 30 years. There were some that had been in the group for years. And then occasionally a newcomer would come in, and some of them would act up or be there for the wrong reasons. And mentors would kind of take them under their wings, and you know, it's just somehow the energy of this people that had learned surrender brought them around. Well, got a new chaplain. The chaplain runs everything. It's amazing what a chaplain in a prison does. They have a big job and they have a lot of responsibilities, and this new chaplain just threw the meeting open. And a bunch of the old timers left, and there's regular turnover anyway, and all of a sudden we had meetings with 25 and 30 people, and some of them had never been to one of these meetings. And part of the meeting that we had centering prayer. And centering prayer is all about letting go. It's about surrender to your relationship to the divine within. And so you sit in the silence, and as soon as you do that, you notice your mind. Your mind, it's not like it starts up then, it's just that we happen to notice it then. When we're in our daily affairs, thoughts come and we act them, we don't give ourselves any chance. We just, oh, okay. And we throw out an opinion, or it says, I've got to do this or that. Well, in centering prayer, the thoughts come, and no matter what they are, we let them go. Now, obviously, if you let the gas burner on the stove, something like that. But if it's thoughts of the divine embracing you, or the Blessed Mother herself there, you let them go. So it's a practice in this. And these women that were in the group when we first started going had that, and it's a daily practice. I've been doing this, and it's slowly chips away, and somebody might be able to tell a difference in me from what it was. But these new women, they had no grounding in that whatsoever. And so it was utter chaos in the meetings. Sometimes there were fist fights, all sorts of stuff. Arguments across the room, and I actually quit going back in the fall, the last time, and some of these women, by then it had been about 2 years, a little over 2 years, 2.5 years that they started. They were the seniors and the mentors of the group, the ones that stayed. There was a lot of turnover because it's not for everybody. This path of descent, ascent through descending, increasing through subtraction. And they were the mentors, and it's just amazing to see the difference in these women. One of the things I was hoping to do, if I have time, was Robert is still a really good example of trusting, because speakers are trained to never give up control of the microphone. And Robert will do it. He invites it. And, I would sit out there and I want to pick at something, or let me just put that in a slightly different way so that everybody will really understand it, And amazingly, that not only did Robert not react to it, he embraced it. Well, I wanted to offer that chance to anybody here. If anybody has a story of how surrender in their life, or any has it worked for them?
Yeah, I can say that, but it's worked for me in the last 30-odd years. That I'm really, really grateful, because I was head on a path where if I didn't surrender, I wouldn't be here. And it was not a choice that I wanted to make. But I was kind of like faced with, it's either this or it's, death in some way. And I just happened to leave, to accept God's invitation and accept that I needed to do something different. And I'm very, very grateful, that I did. And I was not a guy that surrendered stuff. Just ask anybody in my family. Or any of my old friends, or even some of my new friends. So it's really, really important that whole piece around contentment with prayer just made a huge difference. Yeah.
it just chips away at these crystallized image and protection system. And because, I mean, I can be do my daily, morning practice, and, I forgot to call to order that inspection. If I go do it now, it's gonna be 6 o'clock before I finish. If I do it before 6, I can get the inspection done today, and the job won't be delayed further. Let it go. Sometimes it's rehearsing an argument about a conversation I haven't had yet. Let it go. But I want to win the argument in advance.
So I think that anyone who's been in a long-term relationship, and a relationship that continues, has had the experience of surrender. This false self really takes pride in standing its ground, and I am so staunchly attached to that standing my ground, and I'm in relationship with another. It's not going to go real well. So as I value, and Pat mentioned we've been married for 40 years, and there's certainly been, a journey together of learning to surrender. And from time to time, I have another dear one in my life, where we're in the midst of a challenge in the relationship, and to look at, to approach it as though I know what's right, and impose that, or teach that, or preach that, is it's not going to get either of us where we really want to be. And so to surrender within that relationship, what I might think is right, is as it's an analogy of what we can always surrender to God, and know that there is something higher and more powerful and wiser than I could ever be. So that's a way that I experience surrender. It can be something right here in my life, yes, but it's ultimately a surrender to God's greater vision and greater wisdom that I cannot possibly see when I'm in the midst of.
Well, let me close and ask your indulgence to, and I'm probably going to butcher this in tune and word order, but I'm going to sing that verse I opened with from Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 to 30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble of heart. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble of heart. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Come to me, all you who are weary.